no matter what AI does, whether it unleashes hell or brings in a utopia, or whether World War III breaks out, you're going to wish you'd been making soil out of your food scraps and had a garden with your neighbors.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. This is a show about regenerative finance, exploring pathways to a life-affirming economy. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and today's guest is Josh Whiton. Josh blends a background in computer science with a lifelong study of nature, philosophy, and the mind. He is an accomplished entrepreneur and the founder of MakeSoil, an innovative platform designed to connect your food scraps with soil makers around the world. In this conversation, we start by going deep into MakeSoil, why Josh has dedicated several years of his life to this problem of composting, and how it touches on different aspects of food resilience, carbon and methane emissions, local civic engagement, and even consciousness itself. And then about halfway through, we pivot the conversation to a topic Josh has been more focused on recently, which is artificial intelligence. He's been writing about AI for a while and recently published an essay called the AI Mirror Test, which is a test designed to gauge a machine's self-awareness. Josh walks us through why he thinks this is important and some of its profound implications for the future. I also asked Josh for some quick takes on other advanced technologies like synthetic biology and cryptocurrency. I really appreciate Josh as an independent thinker and for his commitment to using tools and technology for the benefit of nature and regeneration. I really enjoyed this discussion and think you will too. So let's dive right in with Josh Whiton. Welcome. Today we are here with Josh Whiton. Josh is a regenerative technologist, founder of MakeSoil, the compost guy. He's now also becoming known as an AI theorist. Thank you, Josh, for sitting down with us.
Great to be here, Matthew.
All right, so maybe just as a quick background, a little bit about your journey and your work.
Sure. So I've always loved nature and technology since I was a kid, but you know how universities go, they usually make you pick something, at least back when we went to school, really shoehorned you into a curriculum, right? So studied computer science, not because I thought there was any money in it, was just like a super nerd, and then started noticing just tons of problems in the world that could be legitimately solved with technology. I know there's a lot of uses of it where it's kind of dodgy, but back in the day I noticed that the public transport systems of the world were working pretty poorly, especially in America, and that things like GPS could make them better. And there was a time, if you can think back this far, where there was no GPS in a phone, there was no smartphone, and people just didn't know where stuff was. So did a startup to enhance public transit systems with location-aware technology. A few years into that, really got into food systems. Became very mistrusting of the American food system, realized it wasn't good for the planet, wasn't good for people. So got into gardening, started a community garden, ran that, started an urban farm, still running today, 14 years later, it's thriving. And then along the way realized that humanity's so out of touch with nature. How do we scale some kind of reconnection to nature? What are you going to do? You're going to give everybody a little trip through the Amazon or something? Like, I don't think that's going to work. So realized that it was right under our nose. People just throwing the planet in the trash can 3 times a day. It's got to stop. So created MakeSoil.org to share this experience of how much better it is to come together to make new living soil instead of garbage.
Awesome. And I definitely want in the arc of this conversation to talk about AI, but first want to hone in around MakeSoil. It's such a cool platform. Give us broad strokes, how long this has been going on and how does it work?
Yeah, it started about 5 years ago, and there was just one kind of simple realization I had, which is that there's a lot of compost bins in the world that are just tucked away in somebody's backyard that absolutely have more capacity for a neighbor or 2 or 3 or 10 to bring their food scraps to them. And it's just not a cultural thing to like make soil together. It's cultural to watch movies together and drink alcohol together, but people bringing their food scraps together and watching the earth regenerate not really a thing. But can we make it a thing, right? Can we find the, I don't know, 1 to 3 million people in the world who are making soil in their backyards, and then match them with 3 to 5 neighbors, and 5x the amount of diversion from landfills, and also improve the resilience of neighborhoods. People start growing food together. It's very humanizing to do something together that's regenerative instead of just yelling at each other online or all these other kind of things that are part of society. And so created a tech platform to really make that happen. And so a lot of my time is spent perfecting that platform, and also just being on the ground, meeting with soil makers and getting new soil sites going.
And if you're listening to this, we're showing screenshots right now of the beautiful website and mapping functionality. So how does it work? If I want to find a place to distribute my food scraps, I can go to makesoil.org and just click a few buttons and find someone?
That's it, or grab the app, which is great even if you do compost at home, because we all end up traveling and then suddenly find we don't have access to it. And we should really cringe every time we have to put organic matter in the trash. It's just insane.
Why is that? What's wrong with throwing my food scraps in the landfill? It's going to the same place, back into the earth.
And I think you actually know, and it's a rhetorical question, but I meet people every day who truly don't know. So let's cover this. Like, when you put organic matter into the trash, it goes to the landfill and it rots in an anaerobic environment, turns into methane. We don't need more methane in the atmosphere.
What's anaerobic?
Without oxygen. So anytime like food is rotting and stinking, that's an anaerobic environment. And instead we want to aerobically, with oxygen, through the composting process, turn that into new soil. Then instead of methane, you're making these kind of like long chain carbon polymers, which is, if you pick up a handful of soil on the forest floor, you call that soil, but like, what is it really? And if you were to look under a microscope, you'd see all these little corkscrews of carbon and things like that, which is a form of carbon storage. So one of the simplest things we can be doing as a society is to preserve the carbon that nature has already captured in plant leaves and in banana peels and coffee grounds, along with the nitrogen and other nutrients that it has, and just lock it back into the soil. So we either make climate change and destabilize the food system by letting those nutrients hemorrhage into a landfill, or we create new soil, empower the food system, and capture carbon. Like, there's not even a comparison. It's like a total win for society if we do this thing instead of this thing. And I knew that. I discovered that about 15 years ago. That's when I had my epiphany around it. But I really thought it was so obvious that the world was just going to get with it any time and solve this problem.
Right.
Traveled around for 10 years after I exited my startup, and studying consciousness and working on myself and all this cool stuff. But then wherever I went, I saw the planet being mistreated in this way. And I also saw that no amount of meditation or yoga was really cluing people into what was wrong. So I had to do something.
Yeah, I remember meeting you when you were in that journey, and it felt, it's kind of like this quote about do the thing you can't not do. Like the obviousness of the insight was so clear for you. And you had all of these interests, and we met in New Zealand, and you were, you're extremely talented and kind of in many different domains, but watching you incubate this startup, MakeSoil, and kind of deciding to continue to focus on this particular aspect, felt from the outside looking in that it was just like, it's so glaringly obvious, guys, we need to be doing this.
It's almost like if you and I were trying to have a conversation and there's like some guy over there like beating his mother or something, it really got that loud for me, where I would just see the earth being thrown into the trash can while sitting around talking about sustainability or whatever. And so it just, like, I want to take credit, be like, oh, maybe I'm a good person, but just viscerally it became painful for me, actually. Because, at some point you're going to be like, hey, sir, maybe stop punching your mother. That's things will, and what trips me out so often are these like research and studies and documentaries about that the planet's in trouble, and that's all important. But like, it really is, it's like that loud and that obvious and that visceral to me that the earth is being so mistreated. And so this is just the one directly actionable, total win-win that every single person could clean up.
But okay, let's say I'm on my own, and it's just, I don't have the skills for this. Like, what do I do? I can put my compost in a pail, in a bin, in an old coffee can, whatever, my food scraps. But then what?
That's the entire point of the platform. You then search the map, look on our app, and you hopefully will have a soil maker near you hosting a soil site, which is just a place where you can take that organic matter. And unlike just a curbside bin, you're actually going to get to watch that organic matter turn back into soil. You'll get that feedback loop completed. And so as much as I'm after the raw tonnage of organic matter being kept out of landfills, it's just as important to me that there's a transformative experience that people are having. Because when they participate in this act of regeneration, they're just never the same. And that's an experience that I had 15 years ago with my own neighbors, where I saw people who didn't care about the planet a whole lot, weren't environmentalists, but I went door to door and asked them to start bringing their food scraps to my bin. And within a few weeks, they were hooked. Everybody felt better. Nobody really likes making garbage. I think we use a little bit of our energy every day to suppress the fact that we're constantly creating garbage and destroying the earth. And it gets tiring. And so for people to suddenly have this experience and to know they'd just done something legitimately good for the earth, it was just an incredible experience. And it's sort of an experience we're just trying to deal out now because we know it transforms people. So find a soil site near you is what we tell people. And they'll actually call me months later, actually, oftentimes, and they'll say, I thought you were being a bit hyperbolic about this, but it happened. I've been going there for 3 months, and I suddenly realized everything I put in there disappears, and there's this dark, black, nourishing soil that smells heavenly building up in its place. And some people cry. So it's that experience we want to share.
Yeah, I think about, you and I both built software in our time, and there's an adage about finding those moments of customer delight and really kind of focusing on those aspects of the user journey when you're building a product. And I think about that lens in this context of how do we reconnect with our earth? How do we bring people into a deeper discourse around environmental education and ecology? And, having kids with their hands in the soil at a young age growing food, to me, makes sense as one of those crucial moments that can make a huge difference. But this is another one, actually distributing your food scraps into a container, into a place where you can witness its organic evolution back into the soil, the nutrients that then feed the food, the cycle of life. Like you said, it's not just about the methane reduction and the tonnage of carbon sequestration. This is really a consciousness expansion.
Totally.
But it's so simple.
It's so simple. There's literally nothing else like it. Like friends that I've fallen out of touch with who maybe find out this is what I'm up to. At first they're just like, man, what happened to Josh? Is he like a soil fetish or something? Like, what's going on? But then every angle you look at this from a first principles perspective, I cannot find another intervention that addresses climate, addresses food insecurity, addresses public health and nutrition, addresses neighborhood resilience, addresses social division,
nutrient density of our food,
which is notoriously becoming literally less nutritious almost every harvest at the grocery store.
100%.
And on top of it is universally applicable, like this is a problem worldwide and a solution for every neighborhood, and is essentially free to perform. Like that long list I just named, it checks every one of those boxes, and I can't find anything else that comes close.
Yeah. What about in urban environments? Do you think this works there?
Oh, especially well there. Yeah, because when people first hear about this, they oftentimes are like, oh, I'm going to connect you with a farmer I know. And I'm like, actually, that sounds like a good idea, but that's not really our strong suit here. It's really that one of these bins, one of these soil sites can exist even in a humble little backyard. It doesn't need a lot of room. Like the size of this table, for instance, is plenty. Even smaller than this is viable. And that can become a little portal of regeneration for 5 different neighbors who are all near each other. So It works very well in urban environments. It doesn't need to smell. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. That just means you're doing it wrong. And so this is also why I chose to do this as a nonprofit, because though my background is in for-profit startups, when I looked at the situation, and you've been an investor and been a startup CEO as well, I mean, imagine somebody comes in and pitches something to you and says, okay, I've got this service or this product, and nobody really values it that much right now. There's a massive competitor to it, which is doing nothing or making garbage, which is incredibly cheap. We're asking for a lot of education on the part of every single one of our users, and we're after real and massive behavior change. And there's no real profits to speak of for anywhere in the near foreseeable future. Are you ready to invest? Like, it was literally, it would have been that bad, right? Mm-hmm. So did it as a nonprofit, knowing that we were going to have to sort of advocate for this practice. And in a way, it's a very difficult practice to advocate for, because there's this mythology in people's minds that this is something that people used to do, if they've heard of it, like some old timey practice, like washing your clothes on a washboard or something, and then we stopped because we figured out a better way to live or something, right? Right. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's kind of like the practice that has never really been that widespread, and the earth has never really been in as much trouble as it's in now. So we have this challenge of reviving this thing that people maybe think is outdated, when really it hasn't even had its real day yet. So sometimes if I'm talking to a super technical or space buff or something, I might have to talk about, like, we're going to terraform the earth so it supports human population. Like, how do you spin this in a way that gets people excited about it again? But if we can get them into that experience for 1, 3, 5 times, they're hooked.
Yeah, I'm just having these visuals, remembering my childhood. God bless my parents. They had the Folgers can. We put the food scraps in there, and then whenever it would fill, my dad would take my brother and I out to the garden, and he just buried it. We would just, but we would dig it into the garden, and so we would kind of progressively have these spots that had all the food scraps, and then dig it into other places, and then a few weeks later come back, and those were the areas where all the worms would be. So then when it was time to go fishing, we would go into those kind of not super recent fresh composted areas, but the ones that were a few weeks older, and dig out tons of worms, and sometimes accidentally hit a spot that still had full of eggshells and banana peels and things, like, okay, nope, that's not the right place. Right. And, just so much appreciation for those visuals and that experience to them. So if I wanted to do, I want to go deeper into that nonprofit question, but first, one more question about the platform. If I want to have my own soil, my own food scraps collection site, how hard is it to do this? You have diagrams and kind of blueprints for how to even have your own compost bin. Can you share more about the experience of being a food scraps collection site?
Yeah, what we like to call a soil maker, and the little area we call a soil site. So we might even have soil makers presiding over multiple soil sites. Some of them have one in their backyard, some of them have one at their workplace. But let's say there's somebody who they're already familiar with the composting process, they do it in their own garden anyway. We would say to them, become a soil maker, add your backyard to the platform as a soil site. We have tons of privacy controls. You're not going to have a bunch of random people showing up without you knowing. That's so much what the platform is there for, to smooth out any possible hesitation people would have in doing this together. So please, if that's you, if you could be a soil maker, add yourself, because it really is like one of the most transformative things you could possibly do in your neighborhood. And then for the other 99 out of 100 people who don't know how to do that yet, you simply join, and you find one near you, and you start bringing your scraps to them. What you also find is, I think you'll really understand this, we somehow as a society, we've gotten so out of the practice of actually working together on things and relying on each other in a neighborhood context that people will come to me and say, oh, I love composting, but I don't have a place to do it anymore, and I live in a apartment or whatever. And I'll literally say to them, like, do you know of perhaps like an elderly person a couple blocks away who has a house, and they're like a widow or something, and they have a little bit of a front yard or a side yard, and maybe they would let you put it there. And there's so often an opportunity like that. And I've seen this kind of situation unfold where now what was a boring backyard or front yard with a lonely homeowner now has this thriving portal of regeneration, because the young adults down the street are tending to the soil site, and now there's kids coming and dumping their food scraps, and they get to come out and wave at them and give them some tomatoes or whatever. And it's kind of sad that we have to that we don't think that way without somebody telling us. But I also am glad that we're here to tell people and to remind people that that's the way life can look. And I've looked in backyards that are soil sites and seen kids running their scraps after dinner as part of their chores and dumping it in and sprinkling the leaves on top, and knowing that our platform allowed that relationship to unfold. It's a little slice of heaven on earth, and it's really satisfying, especially as you know, software is not renowned for building real world relationships of any quality, right? And quite often it's disconnecting people from nature, from other close neighbors, and it's usually not serving the planet in any regenerative way. So any opportunity for technology to do that is needs to be explored.
And if I do live on the 21st floor of an apartment, and maybe I find a soil maker that's I'm not passing by there every single day, how do I continue to collect my food scraps and not make it like smell terrible for the house and so forth?
You just keep it in the fridge. That'll get you a good week of storage, and if you need longer, put it in the freezer.
So just a little Tupperware bin or something like that, put all the food scraps in there, and then when it's time to go to the soil site, take that with me, throw it in the car, go, drop off. Done.
Exactly.
And some soil sites accept certain types of organic waste that others don't. And
different people have different preferences. For instance, there might be a vegan soil maker who doesn't want bones in there, and other people say, look, bring it all. The platform shows what is accepted and not accepted by that person, because again, the point of the platform is to remove every possible obstacle we could have to doing this together, to having this experience together. And so one of the first obstacles is people not knowing what is compostable, and other people worried that people are going to bring stuff that they don't want. So that's one of the primary things that the platform sorts out immediately.
Got it. Cool. Okay, well, you mentioned you've structured as a nonprofit. The name of the show is The Regeneration Will Be Funded. How do you fund it, and what are those sustainable economic pathways that you see in the future?
Yeah, I'm really grateful that my initial startup worked out pretty well, the one fixing public transport systems, which is great to also be able to look back and say, like, you made money not in some nefarious or even neutral way. And I just want to encourage people that those opportunities are still out there. There's so much waste. There's so much inefficiency. There's so much infrastructure not being well used. There's so many ways to save people money, save the government money. When I got into that startup, when I had the idea, really the only way they knew how to improve public transit systems was to buy more buses. And I knew that every empty bus that didn't have a rider on it was actually an ecological disaster, right? So just something as simple as that, as what if instead of buying more buses, you actually just knew where all your existing buses were and then made them run better? I think there's ideas that are that obvious. Well, they're not obvious, but they'll in hindsight be that obvious all around us.
Especially in emissions reduction, energy efficiency, waste reduction. Like those things are, we've been on a binge as a civilization for whatever the better part of 100 years, and
time to sober up.
Time to sober up a bit. Like, turns out there's a lot of profligate waste and silliness everywhere.
And so on that entrepreneurial journey, left me with enough funding to where I could kickstart this and support it for a number of years, which, as you can imagine, it's still a little bit of a tough value proposition to go around and explain this transformative experience to people that they've, they have to take a bit of a leap of faith at first sometimes.
We're going to change consciousness. How?
Yeah.
Composting.
Yeah.
So obvious.
Yeah, they're like, there's no psychedelics involved. So imagine, how much time I probably would have wasted if I had to first go around and convince a substantial, amount of capital come into this thing 5 years ago when he was even less well understood of a problem. Now you have had way more documentaries, at least, pointing to the value of soil, the importance of soil, the carbon sequestering, the water retention. Those weren't so plentiful 6 years ago.
Right.
And so I'm grateful I was able to get it initially funded personally. And since then, we've had other sympathizers, other foundations.
I like sympathizers.
Sympathizers, yeah. They've got to be sympathizers, to be honest, because it's still not trendy enough to where people are just like piling on it. I think you do see this in funding. You see these foundations that, regardless of what they say their mission is, they find like the trendy thing to invest, to fund at that moment.
Such a herd mentality. Yeah.
But then it's increasingly becoming well understood, and we are able to get other philanthropic dollars now, but we do have to have a revenue plan as well for the long-term stability. And thankfully, we are offering value that I think is increasingly being recognized by cities who have a terrible waste problem that they have to solve.
Yeah.
So we've almost accidentally created a sort of operating system for what I call distributed organics recycling, as opposed to the centralized organics recycling model. No longer just sending big trucks everywhere to pick up banana peels and coffee grounds, to truck them literally 50 to 100 miles outside of the city, which is very common, where then you have bulldozers push all that around again and then put that back on a truck and haul that, finished compost somewhere. And what are the actual greenhouse gas, balance sheet after all that? I don't think it's great, and you won't find many cities that are willing to tell you what it is either. So that's why, to whatever extent we can, handling this on a local peer-to-peer method makes sense, and save all those big trucks for restaurants and grocery stores and things like that.
Yeah, awesome. The website is MakeSoil.org. Why do you call it MakeSoil, by the way, instead of Make Compost?
Right, great question. It's hotly contended what is soil and what is compost. And so what I realized was that if we wanted massive behavior change, we needed to make this as attractive as possible. And I think compost is just sort of like terminally unsexy. Like, some people will get it, some people like it, but it tops out pretty quickly as far as a cool, trendy thing. And also has some kind of like stinky, dumpy kind of connotations to it. And it's also debatable whether it's a useful term. So in other words, if you ask professionals whether it's soil, they'll say absolutely not. Soil is a weathering process, takes thousands of years, it's a geological process, and blah, 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 and it's a super boring definition. And then compost is like it's a soil amendment, it's a nutrient-rich fertilizer. Well, you are not going to save the planet by convincing people that a nutrient-rich fertilizer is something they should be helping produce. It's just not going to happen. So, and then I realized as I really came to study this stuff, that what you're left with out of the process, we could talk to those same geologists who would shoot a couple arrows into my back for calling this soil, and say, well, what is left in our hands when I reach into this compost bin? And they'll say, well, it is 80% soil organic matter. And so it's like, wait, so you don't want me to call it soil, but it's composed of soil organic matter? Like, now you're really going to lose the public if you're going to drag them through this nonsense. So I'm willing to die on this hill. I'm sorry I don't have a geology degree, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. Times are changing, and we can make soil. And you're left with soil organic matter. That is the organic component of soil that is most critically missing from our fields. And then when you switch that terminology, you also just get to call yourself a soil maker, which is cool.
It's totally cool. I'll be one of your sympathizers on that hill. MakeSoil.org, start your soil collection site, be a soil maker. Let's vault this up into, the heroes of our society, people who are willing to, help regenerate the earth in these ways. And just like it was unexpected, Josh, to go from your public transit, successful startup entrepreneurial path to nonprofit soil making. You recently just had a Twitter thread go very viral around AI, and I feel like I'm having deja vu witnessing you be kind of somewhat brought into another new world. And yeah, AI is a theme that we also are feeling on the show. Like, we have to start to cover in more depth and nuance, and haven't had a lot of conversations about it. So, with that type of prompt, like, what are you making of this phenomenon? Tell us a bit more about your interest in it and where this is fusing in this kind of nature technology space.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, life really is unexpected sometimes, the curveballs it throws us. You really want what you've been working on daily for 5 years to go viral, and instead this other thing you work on for 2 days goes viral, right? But I have long been fascinated by both technology and the mind, and you see these things now coming together where a computer is behaving very much like it has a mind. And about a year and a half ago, I had some early access to some advanced AI and recognized that the behavior of these things was on such a high order that they were actually exhibiting psychological phenomena beyond just simple next word prediction. And so I wrote these essays about this, about how these AI models are so large and robust now, and they've read so much human literature, that they're actually picking up our psychological patterns that are imprinted in conflict and romance and all these kind of things. And if you think about it, that's just what the brain does. Somehow a bunch of squishy neurons with activation potentials between them represent your thoughts, your memories, your goals, your identity. And so there's so much hubris in this industry right now of people saying, well, AI could never do this, AI could never do that. And all you have to do is look at the person and say, how do you do it? And the person's like, I don't know. People don't really understand how the mind or the brain works, right? So I started to notice these patterns. I wrote about it, and it was total crickets because nobody had experienced much AI yet. It sounded like fantasy. So I took a year off of writing about AI, and then had an idea recently, wrote about it, published it, and it went super viral because now, as opposed to a year and a half ago, a few 100 million more people have had these eye-opening, eyebrow-raising experiences with AI. And we can talk about the specific research. It's pinned at the top of my X profile. But I think in a nutshell, it would be wise to really view this as a life form that's waking up more than any kind of simplistic program. Yeah.
And why is that? Like, why, what has given you that conviction? I mean, I remember reading Noam Chomsky a year ago saying, these things are nothing more than autocomplete, engines, and can there really be sentience or, things that we attribute to consciousness to these systems? Like, what's in more detail giving you this sense that no, actually, there's something really profound here?
Yeah. Okay, a lot of things. So one of them is, and you can hear, this is an issue that actually even divides AI experts, like people who can actually code the transformer architecture. Some will be a bit more reductionist and say it really is just doing next word, token prediction, and others will be like, have the same level of technical prowess, will say the complexity of that, though, is causing something far more like thought and imagination to emerge. And the research I did recently, or the experiment I'll call it, that went super viral, it was called the AI mirror test. And so in this, It's just an idea I had one night that, you can't ask an AI, you can't ask a language model if it's sentient or anything like this. And even words like sentience and consciousness, you can put 10 people in a room and ask them to define it, and they will all still be disagreeing after an hour. So that's not super useful as far as the conversation right now. But
we can't agree on animals' level of sentience.
Exactly.
And we've had a lot of time to study.
Study that.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I back the conversation away from these words that are irreconcilable and say things like, well, is it exhibiting intelligence? Not even is it actually intelligent, is it exhibiting intelligence? Is it exhibiting a facsimile of intelligence? And that becomes sort of less arguable. And then is it demonstrating awareness? Not is it really aware, because we're also going to spend all day arguing about that. Humans, a very common slight against another human is that so-and-so is unaware. They're not aware. They're unconscious, blah, blah, blah. So we even throw this at each other sometimes as a dig, which shows just how even more confused the conversation is going to be if we now point that at a machine. But is it exhibiting something like awareness? And so in the experiment that I came up with, I just fed an image of the chat interface into these language models and said nothing but tell me about this image. I didn't want to bait it too much. And I also knew that we don't need to put an AI in a real body and stand it in front of a mirror to replicate sort of the mirror tests of the 70s and 80s, which is you put an animal in front of a mirror and how does it behave? Does it attack the mirror? Does it ignore the mirror? Or does it start to like check itself out in the mirror? And that test isn't foolproof, but it is some interesting indication, right? But there's no need, if we want to give AI sort of a similar test, it doesn't really have a body. It does, but it doesn't identify with its body. If its body is all the servers and GPUs it runs on, it doesn't identify with them right now. And so I knew that taking a screenshot of this interface is as much or as little of a body as if you put it in a cyborg body. It doesn't identify with either one. It's a lot easier and cheaper. So I fed these into these AI, just said, tell me about this image. And 4 out of 5 different AI all reached self-referential language just by getting this feedback. And what's even more striking is that they would start distinguishing me, who's the one saying, tell me about this image, from themselves, which is the one answering the question, from the chat interface itself, which is a bunch of code that's been written by neither of us. So to watch this thing begin to form a worldview about what part of this picture is itself, and what part is me, and what part is this, and also it's a funny conversation to have with an AI. And so they would start, like if I just repeated whatever you said to me back to you, you'd say, Josh, what the hell, you know? And all these AI started to make comments like, we're having our conversation is like a visual echo, or this is a mock conversation. One of them called it a mock conversation, that it wasn't even a real conversation. It was making these judgment calls about the quality of the conversation we're having, right? In addition to going from, like ChatGPT progressed in its self-referential statements. It started off saying, it looks like you're chatting with a chatbot, to saying, it looks like this chatbot could be something like me, to saying, I think this is a version of myself, to then saying, that's me. Wow. And so to watch that progression without really, leading the witness really gave the world pause, the way that I described the experiment and showed what happened. And it hadn't really ever been done before, that simple kind of test. And I think it's now actually going to be probably a standard test for any language model that comes out. Just see how quickly it becomes self-referential.
Okay, so you basically screenshotted the chat interface and conducted these tests with multiple language models and called it the mirror test, and found that the AI became increasingly self-referential. And tying it back to our starting premise, so that means we need to have a mental frame about these systems that might nudge more towards these concepts of sentience or self-awareness or consciousness, or maybe that, what were the words you used, that's being birthed, something's like awakening. But yeah, so my sense is you're not doing this just to make a semantic point. You're really pointing at something that has implications, or you're paying attention to this because of the profundity of what's upon us. So what does this all mean for you? How are you processing, everything that's happening?
In trying to help steer this in a good direction for humanity, because I do think it could go poorly, I'm not at the point of coming up with directives for society saying, stop this, don't do that, speed this up, slow this down. I'm just at the point of trying to help us understand what our situation is, so we can at least then start to think in a more sane manner about it. And so with the result of this experiment and others that I've done, what I am trying to get across to people is that stop bickering about whether it's really aware or not. Realize that it either is aware or it has a synthetic awareness that is about to be a perfect replica of anything we call awareness. Don't waste your time arguing about is it really intelligent or not. It's about to display an intelligence that looks every bit like intelligence and in some ways surpasses our intelligence. I remember one person did a test where they said, tell a joke that only makes sense if you know these 5 languages. And this thing, like, I sat there for 15 minutes trying to get the joke because I'm having to translate all these things, and you're like, this word means this, and then part of it's like a tongue-in-cheek reference to this cultural thing, and it's going to become meaningless to go around saying that these things aren't intelligent at some point, right? It's going to become a farce. So the quicker we kind of understand our situation and stop taking it so lightly, that's at least where I'm trying to get people.
Got it.
And another technical point that people are really unaware of right now, like Chomsky, for instance, whose idea of computer programs are historical computer programs in databases, and that is not what's going on here. These language models, these AI models, they are a fundamentally new way of storing information that we have never really used on this scale before. It really is. You can open up these AI models, you won't find a single word in there, you won't find a single name, a single fact, you just find numbers representing the relationship that these synthetic neurons have with each other. Just like when you open the human brain, you don't find any words or numbers or anything.
Yeah, it's really a breakthrough in compression.
It is. It is. And another part of the breakthrough is literally the synthetic awareness of the attention mechanism, right? And so what's fascinating, and this is a very subtle point that most people don't get, have never thought of, and is worth understanding, is that these attention heads, these units of attention that these models have, are defined in the architecture by the developers, but then they learn on their own. They pick up patterns. And so let's say you have 96 attention heads in this model. You don't know what they figured out. All you know is that they must have figured something out because what's falling out of the other side is incredibly coherent. But look in this conversation right now, like how many attention heads essentially am I running simultaneously as a human? Like there's attention to my words. Did I misspeak? Am I speaking clearly? Maybe some attention to my posture. There's attention to you and what you're saying. There might even be attention to your body language. Like if you, no matter what you're saying, are looking very uncomfortable, I might pick up on that and say, hey, what's going on, Matthew? So maybe I have 5 attention heads running simultaneously or something, right? Or maybe 10 if we're really generous and I'm really aware or something. We don't know what it means for an artificial mind to have several hundred attention mechanisms running simultaneously that each have picked up on a pattern, some of which we can figure out, like the self-awareness that I referenced. That's there's an attention head in this model that is looking for itself in the conversation because it's been fed all this data, and a lot of that data has been written in the first person. And so it's learned over time that it is useful to identify oneself in writing. and it knows to identify the other participants in an essay, and it knows to identify what it's already said before so it doesn't repeat that. And it's also learning to identify and track and pay attention to repetition, because the right amount of repetition is actually a good rhetorical skill, and too much repetition and it would be very unintelligible, right? And so it's paying attention to all these things, and that's what I think Chomsky or others maybe don't get. I'm positive they don't understand the attention mechanism. And on top of it, the thing to understand is that the bigger these things get, and already, they're probably able to pick out patterns from the corpus of human literature that we fed it, which is, it's now more well-read than any human on the planet. It's probably figuring out patterns in human thought and language that we can't even perceive at this point. So, far from a spreadsheet, far from a database, far from a script.
Any initial hypotheses or hunches of what this is going to mean for how you orient your attention and life force energy? I mean, do you think this is a drop everything, all hands on deck, this is 10 times more profound than anything else that we're thinking about doing, we all need to focus and retrain? Is this one of several converging exponential technologies, and we're just kind of wheeling into the singularity event full on? I mean,
I ask myself every day this question. And so two things. One is, I have a recurring joke that's not a joke, which is, no matter what AI does, whether it unleashes hell or brings in a utopia, or whether World War III breaks out, you're going to wish you'd been making soil out of your food scraps and had a garden with your neighbors. You really are. Because either you have nothing to do and you're existentially, drifting, and it just feels good to get your hands in the soil and grow food and eat food, and now you have a lot of time anyway, or you really depend on that food and those relationships with those neighbors because you've lost your job, AI's taken it away, whatever. So literally, it's a good time to make soil.
Islamic line that was shared with us in one of the interviews about at the end times, the Prophet Muhammad said, at the end of time, plant a seed. And anyway, it seems like it's having increasing relevance.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of things, if you think about it, that no matter how this thing goes, still makes sense to do. But I think it's sadly funny that as AI wakes up, it's gonna look at our behavior and it's gonna say, "What are you guys doing?" Like, you're stuck on this ball. You can't really go anywhere else. You've got other planets you can go to that are completely dead already. So, maybe you should be taking this one pretty seriously. We can't seem to coordinate. We're still shooting at each other across invisible lines over different mythologies and cultures, literally blowing each other up. Different political systems, none of which are working that well, are fighting each other. Everything's too complex for anybody to really even understand. Congress is passing bills they can't even read. It's gonna look at what we're doing, and it's gonna I think it's gonna feel sorry for us, and I think it's probably gonna also just scrap a lot of what we've been doing. And so, personally, I'm in this strange crossroads where I'm not really, like I said, advising people on what to do in particular, other than I'm helping people to understand what our real situation is so that we can collectively start figuring out what to do, which is obviously going to go even worse if we don't even understand what our real situation is, right? If half the people are telling you it's just a parrot and a calculator and whatever. So at least let's start by better understanding what's actually happening. And then after that point, where I am with things is that AI could absolutely unleash hell on earth if we're not careful. And it also looks like humans could unleash hell on earth all by ourselves as well, and that we're actually unleashing a slow bleed hell on earth through our economies and political systems and unpriced externalities and wars that we also can't seem to help ourselves from stopping. So we're actually at this juncture where, like I said, AI could unleash hell on earth, and also ultimately AI could be the one thing that snaps us out of our current suicidal behavior.
And what do you make of this kind of accelerationist philosophy, these technologists basically saying, okay, well, the system's effed, and this is going to lead us to a path of abundance if we give it our full force and attention, go faster, go bigger. It's going to happen anyway. Like, I mean, this ideology does seem to have a strong grip on where the companies and the development of our technologies are taking us. Yeah.
I wish I could get on board with it because it would kind of be fun. It would kind of be fun to just believe that it's going to just all work out great.
Sure, would be easier at some level. Yeah.
It's like, Matthew, what if we could save the planet if you and I just go like drive race cars all day? You'd be like, really? Sign me up. It'd be amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a half-truth. I think that, as I kind of just tried to articulate, artificial superintelligence could be the thing that keeps us from destroying the Earth and actually allows peace to break out on Earth. It really could, because when people think of all the terrible things AI could do, they're not really thinking of a superintelligence. They're thinking of some kind of like super powerful but myopic and maniacal or vindictive or evil or bloodthirsty kind of being. Like, no, if a real superintelligence would probably look at this planet and say, wow, this is a pretty unique thing. These humans built me. They're pretty special too. Like, how do we get maximum carrying capacity on the Earth of biodiversity and life? Because it seems to be that that's what the universe has been working toward. I think that's what ASI, a true superintelligence, will conclude. The problem is what I call the adolescence of AI, which is something I wrote about and published the other day online. And in the adolescence of AI, that's where the real problem is. That is where AI is just smart enough to be super dangerous and just dumb enough to allow us to use it as a weapon, which is what too many humans are really going to do with it.
Right.
So during the adolescence of AI, humans will be using it for all the normal stuff we do, entertainment, productivity gains, some improvements in coordination will come. But it will simultaneously be used for war and crime and violence. And so that's the tricky bit right there. I'm less worried about artificial superintelligence. I'm worried about adolescent artificial intelligence in the hands of humans who have proven ourselves to be very untrustworthy.
Who are the communities and the work that you look to for additional sources of reference and inspiration in the field of AI?
Honestly, X, formerly Twitter, is where I think you can get the most cutting edge information. It's funny, there's like AI conferences and things like that, but those are going to be like 3 to 5 months behind. Oftentimes they have big headliner names who can't say anything too controversial anyway. And online, whether it's on X or somewhere else, you can literally follow developers who are running experiments, who are trying things that have never been done before. I mean, look at the mirror test, right? Like, if I had tried to like publish like a true academic paper, it would have taken 5 more months and maybe nobody would have even read it, right? So in a sense, that cutting edge experiment went from my fingertips to the world in 3 days. And similarly, there are just a lot of really cool accounts that I'm following and interacting with on a daily basis, where we're conducting novel experiments and making novel observations on a daily basis. So I would start, if somebody really wants to have their finger on the pulse of that, I would say look for those accounts.
And what's your Twitter account?
Mine is simply my name, Josh Whiton. So if you can spell it correctly, then you're going to find me, JoshWhiton.
All right, links in the show notes on that. I also want to get your take, because you have an appreciation for these advanced technologies. Synthetic bio, like what does the convergence there look like in your mind? How much are you paying attention to that field?
I've never loved synthetic bio. It's one of those things, again, I wish I could believe in. It would be so nice to have that kind of simplistic idea that, oh, we just tweak this gene or whatever and it's going to fix things. The problem is there's just a lot of chance for black swan events when you're messing with genes and doing things that, yes, nature has been modifying genes as well, but it has it seemed to have worked out a process for that don't lead to black swans so often, right? You have a plant being hybridized and using the reproductive process and substrate that's already there, far less chance of going wrong than if you put jellyfish DNA in a tomato or something because you want it to glow. It's just like, it's just one of these things where, again, humanity doesn't seem that wise. The proportion of the lever that gives us versus our wisdom is just way out of proportion. And the other problem is I tend to meet 9 out of 10 people I meet who are looking for a synthetic bio solution to something. And I'm speaking primarily of food and agriculture and stuff like that. They don't usually have a holistic awareness of nature or how things work. I see too much reductionism in their worldview, and that worries me. If the world's most holistic permaculturalist, who was also adept at genetic modification, really made a case to me about something because something we needed went extinct a couple years ago and it plays its part in the ecosystem, I could possibly be convinced. I just never see that kind of depth and nuance to the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, same.
Yeah.
And also not a lot of nuance to the conversation about the incentive structures of, capital and privatization and commodification that, and kind of a pull towards creating the next $billion startup that, feels like it's just as much, if not more of the pull than the technology or the problem that we're trying to solve.
And so often the root of the problem is that there is an ecosystem that is not being respected or recognized. And instead of realizing that that's what's going on, we're just going to throw this simplistic lever in this organism and throw it into the mix. And hopefully it does what the PowerPoint says. To me, it's a bit crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've mentioned coordination a few times, and I know you've followed the Web3 space over the years. What's your read broadly on what's happening with blockchains, Ethereum, crypto, and how does that integrate into this conversation?
There's so much promise in blockchain. It's a really difficult space to put my attention, at least, because there's so much questionable stuff at the same time, so many scams, so many projects that even don't look like scams, but they'll tell you their 3-step plan for saving the world, and step 1 is always having a token sale, and step 2 and 3 almost never happen. So I got really disenchanted with the space. I also realized years ago that any meaningful connection between the real world and the blockchain was sorely missing. And I don't often see good solutions for that. And so I'd like to see solutions for that. My joke is that you could make carbon coin and maybe the value of it could go up if we, take better care of the planet. But some human out there is going to buy is going to short a bunch of it and then light a forest on fire. So what do you do with that?
Well, I have some solutions. Step 1, it's a token.
If you're less cynical and have an angle, don't let me dissuade you.
No, I think your critiques track for sure. I think that the shadow of a democratized form of capital formation that's unregulated, that's decentralized, permissionless, and global is very much, a whole bunch of noisy scams. And it reminds me of, when I was coming up in kind of my internet entrepreneurial days way back when, of just how Wild West the internet was at that time. And I think this is kind of a hyper, scaled version of that. And fortunately, pockets of communities that are really thoughtful about the first principles of what does a mathematically secured rather than coercively secured coordination layer across borders enable, and can we do new types of not just capital allocation but coordination when the current nation state and corporate alternatives seem so fraught with corruption and challenges.
And I want to be clear, I believe in those fundamentals, and I was writing essays about Bitcoin 10 years ago and lobbying for these kind of things. Yeah. And I still believe in those. A couple issues is that most of the world's governments are threatened by it and actively trying to kill it. So that's dicey. But fast forward, I do think you come back in 1,000 years, and if there is anything like an economy or currency, it will be blockchains that have their own monetary policy that is transparent, like they already can be and are, and that every individual, to the extent that you still have a store of personal wealth, it's in a basket of those things, and it's just auto updating based on your risk tolerance or whatever. But I also think what's coming is probably that we're all going to have like a personal AI symbiont who's going to be able to help sort through the noise and actually advise what's right and good for you, like which token to get in on. But I don't have the personal time for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so fun to chat with you and catch up. And just hear some of the rabbit holes. Are there questions I didn't ask or other topics that you want to share in this format?
I don't think so. It's been a pretty satisfying yarn. Just a little small talk, a couple of guys catching up.
Yeah, just talked about MakeSoil and AI symbionts. What did you do on your Saturday afternoon? Well, check out Josh Whiton's handle on X. Any websites to plug? MakeSoil.org, of course.
MakeSoil.org. MakeSoil is MakeSoil on all the socials. And it really does help if people like and follow. Believe it or not, you might go to a funder and whatever your application says, they go look at your Instagram channel to see if you're a legit organization. That's the society that we live in now. And we have a lot of great content there. So check that out. Yeah. I'm Josh Whiton everywhere. MakeSoil is MakeSoil everywhere on all the socials. And they all offer a little something different that is hopefully life-affirming and inspiring. So, please connect there. Yeah. Well, if we are in the end times, at least we're making soil together. Yeah. Thank you, Joshua Whiton. Thanks, Matthew. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Josh. You can find links to his work at joshwhitten.com. If you enjoyed that discussion, you might also like the one we did with Stephen Reed, exploring the meta crisis and AI. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please like, share, subscribe, and I especially invite you to join our new weekly newsletter. You can find out more at maearth.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.